The night shift at Mercy General started the way it always did, with the fluorescent lights humming their electric prayer and the smell of antiseptic mixing with something darker underneath, something that never quite washed away no matter how much bleach they used. Hannah Clarke pushed her cart through the corridor at 11:07 p.m., her scrubs still crisp, her name badge clipped to her collar at the precise angle that drew no attention. 8 months she'd been here. 8 months of keeping her head down, her voice low, her hand steady even when the tremor wanted to betray her. The tremor came at night mostly, when her fingers reached for water bottles or adjusted fall lines. She managed it by gripping clipboards harder, by moving with purpose, by never letting anyone watch her long enough to notice. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like insects trapped in amber. She'd gotten good at ignoring that sound. At ignoring most sounds, actually. The skill came from somewhere deep, somewhere she didn't visit anymore. Her assigned rooms for the night were 7 through 12 on the East Corridor, a stretch of the emergency department that caught the overflow, the cases that didn't bleed flashy or seize dramatically, the patients who required patience more than adrenaline. She could do patience. Patience was the only thing she had left that didn't break under pressure. The ER census at 11 p.m. was holding at 18 beds, 3 of them empty, which meant the night would be moderate. Not quiet. Mercy General never got quiet. But manageable. Room 7 held what the intake form called unresponsive male, 67 years old, presenting with difficulty communicating. The chart flagged it in 4 different colors. Yellow for behavioral concern. Red for non-compliance flag. Orange for medical complexity. There was a handwritten note in the margin, communication barrier. Recommend psychiatric evaluation before treatment. Hannah pulled the chart from the holder and read it properly, standing in the corridor where the light was better. 10 different physician signatures. That was the first number that caught her attention, not because it was unusual, but because it was complete. 10 names meant 10 encounters. 10 opportunities to help. 10 refusals. Dr. James Whitmore, patient refuses examination. Non-compliant with standard protocols. Dr. Patricia Mendez, unable to establish communication. Recommend discharge or facility transfer. Dr. Richard Hayes, behavioral issues. Recommend psychiatric consult before proceeding with medical workup. The pattern repeated 8 more times down the page, each signature a small indictment, each refusal dressed up in medical language. Refuses. Unable. Behavioral. Non-compliant. Hannah's jaw tightened. She'd learned to control the physical reaction, the clench of her teeth, the stiffening of her shoulders, but the feeling underneath, that stayed. That was the thing about spending 14 months in Kandahar field hospitals, about learning to treat soldiers with half their faces missing and 6 different bleeding points, about holding a clinic for 36 hours straight while insurgents probed the perimeter. You never forgot what it meant when doctors stopped trying. She pushed into room 7. The Marine sat on the bed in clean clothes that hung loose on his frame like borrowed skin. His hands, weathered and scarred in ways that spoke of methodical work, mechanical, maybe, or construction, clutched a pair of combat boots. The leather was tan desert issue, the kind they issued before the newer models, and the laces were stained with something dark that might have been blood or might have been 30 years of accumulated wear. He didn't look up when Hannah entered. His eyes held the flat, distant quality of someone who'd learned that looking at people only created complications. His daughter sat beside him in one of the plastic chairs that squeaked when you shifted your weight. Mid-40s, Hannah guessed. Worried the way families get when they've run out of doctors to call. "Hi," Hannah said. Her voice came out gentle, the way she'd learned to make it, the way you spoke to people who were used to being shouted at, talked over, dismissed. "I'm Hannah. I'm a nurse here. Can we talk about what brought you in tonight?" The Marine didn't respond. Didn't acknowledge. The daughter's shoulders sagged slightly. "He hasn't spoken in 7 years," she said. "Not since his discharge. The last doctor said it was psychological, that he was refusing to communicate as a form of passive resistance." "But that's not," she stopped. Started again. "That's not who my father is." Hannah set the chart down on the beside table and pulled a stool over. She didn't lean forward. She didn't use the bright voice people used with people they thought were broken. She just sat, about 3 feet away, where he could see her if he wanted to, where he didn't have to. "What's your name?" Hannah asked the Marine. He didn't answer. But his hands tightened on the boots. Hannah watched that. The way his fingers pressed into the leather like he was checking to make sure it was still real. "My father's name is James," the daughter said. "James Brennan. Senior Chief. He's wearing socks from FOB Shank," Hannah said quietly. Silence. A specific kind of silence, the kind with weight to it. James Brennan's head turned. Just barely. Just enough. His eyes were a pale grey, the color of morning fog over water, and they fixed on Hannah with a kind of intensity that made the air pressure change in the small room. Hannah kept her expression neutral. Camp Lejeune uniform laundry. They had a specific marking system. Diamond with initials. I worked in a hospital that used the same distribution service. It wasn't entirely true. But it was true enough, and the truth had too many chapters. You were posted somewhere that used their supply lines. James Brennan's grip on the boot softened. Just barely. But it softened. "What happened tonight?" Hannah asked. "What made you come in?" He still didn't speak. But this time, Hannah understood that it wasn't refusal. It was something else. Damage, maybe. Trauma expressed through silence instead of screaming. She'd seen it before. She'd treated it before. She'd lived it before. "You don't have to talk," Hannah said. "You can nod or shake your head. Can you do that?" A nod. Small, but present. Hannah glanced at the monitor beside the bed. His vitals were stable. Blood pressure 128/76. Heart rate 71. Oxygen saturation at 96% on room air. None of the red flags that made doctors anxious. "Where does it hurt?" Hannah asked. James Brennan's hand moved to his left side, just under his ribcage. "Chest pain?" Hannah asked. "Shortness of breath?" A nod for the chest pain. A slight nod for the breathing. "How long?" He held up 3 fingers. 3 hours. A nod. Hannah stood and moved to the monitor, checking the readings again, then palpating his ribcage with careful fingers. Her hands were steady now. This was the place where they always steadied, when someone needed them to be. The tremor vanished. The memory of Kandahar field hospitals, of compressed air escaping from pneumothorax cases, of the desperate mathematics of triage, it all rose up and organized itself into something useful. She could feel it when he breathed. A slight restriction on the left side. Not labored, but present. Not quite right. "I want to listen to your lungs," Hannah said. "May I?" James Brennan nodded. She used the stethoscope from her pocket, the good one, the Littmann she'd carried for 15 years, the same instrument she'd used in field hospitals and combat support hospitals and every crisis in between. She placed it against his back, listening. Left lower lobe, clear. Left upper lobe, clear. Right lower lobe, clear. Right upper lobe, slightly diminished. Bilateral breath sounds present, but the left side was quieter than it should be. Her mind was already running through the differential. Pneumonia would present with crackles. He didn't have crackles. Pulmonary embolism was possible, but his oxygen saturation was good. Pleurisy, maybe. Or something more subtle. Something that required watching. Something that required someone to actually care enough to watch. "I'm going to talk to the doctor," Hannah said. "But I think we're going to do some tests. A chest X-ray, maybe an EKG. That okay with you?" He nodded. She was halfway to the door when she heard the voice from the corridor, sharp and territorial. "Clarke. You got a minute?" Dr. Sterling stood in the doorway of room 7, his white coat pristine enough to be new, his expression arranged into something that approximated concern but landed closer to irritation. He was 17 years older than Hannah, which put him in his mid-50s, and he carried the kind of confidence that came from knowing everyone in the hospital owed him something. He was the administrator. He made the decisions that determined which nurses got the good shifts and which ones got reassigned to pediatrics or the psychiatric ward. He approved the equipment purchases and the staffing ratios and the raises, or didn't. Behind him, Hannah could see 2 of the evening shift nurses glancing over, then looking away quickly. "Just finishing intake," Hannah said. She kept her voice level, professional, the way you spoke to people who had power over you. "I saw the chart," Sterling said. 10 doctors. 10 refusals. You understand what that means. I understand that a patient needs evaluation. Sterling's expression didn't change, but something in his posture tightened. This one's a psych case. Unresponsive, non-compliant, behavioral red flags across the board. He'll tie up resources and rack up liability. The psychiatric department should handle this. His vitals are stable, Hannah said. He's not refusing care. He just can't communicate through speaking. That's exactly what I mean, Sterling said. Communication difficulties make him a documented risk. We've got people with actual medical emergencies waiting. The ER had 2 patients waiting in the main bay. Hannah had checked the board at shift change. Both were ambulatory, both had vital signs that were holding steady. I can work this up in room 7, Hannah said. It won't impact the wait times. Sterling's jaw tightened. He looked past her into the room where James Brennan sat holding those combat boots like they might disappear if he loosened his grip. He looked at the daughter, at the chart, at something invisible in the air between them. You sure you want to take this one, Clarke, he said. He's been nothing but trouble. Last 6 doctors wanted him out of here as soon as the paperwork cleared. Hannah felt something ancient and familiar move through her chest. It was the same feeling she'd had in Kandahar when the IED went off 2 clicks from the forward operating base and her team was pulling 17 Marines out of a kill zone. It was the same feeling she'd had when she made the decision to leave that life behind, to disappear into civilian work where no one knew her name or her history or the things she'd done. It was the feeling of being needed when everything else was falling apart. I'll take him, Hannah said. You don't have to worry about the liability. Sterling studied her for a moment, and she watched his expression shift into something sharper. She'd made a mistake, she realized. She'd shown certainty. She'd shown confidence. She'd shown something that suggested she knew something he didn't. That was the moment his eyes changed. That was the moment he started calculating what she might cost him. Fine, he said. But document everything. I want to see every conversation, every intervention, every medication. Clear. Clear, Hannah said. She watched him walk away, watched him stop at the nursing station and say something to the charge nurse that made her glance toward room 7, watched him check his phone and make a note in his personal calendar. Then Hannah pushed the door closed and turned back to James Brennan, who was watching her with those fog-grey eyes like he'd just watched someone decode something important. Okay, she said quietly. Let's get you a chest X-ray. Dr. Sterling arrived at exam room 7 at 8:41 a.m. with 3 residents trailing behind him like satellites caught in his orbit. His voice carried deliberately, loud enough for the hallway to register every word, every inflection. Hannah was drawing blood from the Marine's left arm when Sterling entered, his presence shifting the temperature of the room the way a predator changes the acoustic landscape of a forest. The residents stood behind him, pens poised, waiting to transcribe whatever wisdom their attending would dispense. Sterling flipped through the patient chart with the deliberate slowness of a prosecutor entering evidence. Nurse Clarke. Walk me through your clinical reasoning here. If you have any. The emphasis hung in the air like humidity before a storm. Hannah straightened, her back already rigid, not from fear, but from the kind of posture that doesn't bend. Vital stable. O2 sat 96% on room air. Heart rate 68. Blood pressure 142/89. He's showing no signs of acute distress. Her voice was level, measured, the voice of someone reading a weather report rather than defending her medical judgment. The Marine's daughter, Carol, sat in the corner chair, her body language coiling tighter with each passing second. Sterling didn't look up from the chart. 10 qualified physicians deemed this patient non-compliant. Non-compliant, meaning they had already made clinical decisions based on extensive experience. But Nurse Nightingale here thinks she knows better. He turned a page with deliberate theatre. His tailored blazer, Italian wool, probably $4,000, caught the fluorescent light as he moved. The kind of person who used fabric as armor. Tell me, Clarke, did your online nursing certification cover the complexities of treating combative psychiatric patients? Or were you absent that day? Hannah took one measured breath. The kind of breath that moves through you like a combat medic counting down from 10. Sir, he's not combative. He's mute due to a laryngeal injury. The chart documents. I've read the chart. Sterling's voice cut through hers with the precision of surgical steel. He turned to face the residents, positioning himself so Hannah remained in his peripheral vision, a technique of deliberate dismissal. This is what happens when empathy overrides clinical competence. Nurse Clarke has decided that her feelings about this patient are more important than established diagnostic criteria. Make a note. One of the residents actually wrote that down. Hannah watched the pen move across the clipboard. She felt nothing. The trembling people expect to see in moments like this never arrived. What arrived instead was the clarity that comes from having already survived worse. This man served in Sangin. Hannah's voice dropped an octave, not from emotion, but from something deeper. Muscle memory recognizing a situation that required command presence. The same place my son deployed under his command. And I will not abandon him. She said it quietly enough that only Sterling and Carol and the 3 residents heard it. That was the point. Not a performance. A statement of fact. A line drawn. Sterling's jaw tightened. His nostrils flared once, twice. He wasn't accustomed to having his authority questioned, not by someone in scrubs, not by someone he'd already decided was beneath him. He stood there for 3 seconds, the air pressure in the room shifting like a barometric drop before a hurricane. Then he turned and walked out without another word, his residents scrambling to follow, their pens clicking against their clipboards like nervous fingers on a trigger. The Marine kept his eyes fixed on those worn combat boots beside the bed, the ones he'd clutched to his chest the night he arrived, the ones that smelled like diesel and dust and deployments the hospital's cleaning protocols had never encountered. Carol reached across the mattress and squeezed Hannah's hand. Hannah didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back either. Some acknowledgements hurt too much to reciprocate. 20 minutes later, Hannah was charting in the nursing station when the unit clerk called her name. A formal write-up had been posted on the break room bulletin board. Hannah's name. Dr. Sterling's signature in heavy blue ink. The words insubordination and poor judgment printed in the hospital's official sans serif font. It was the kind of document designed to be seen, not just read, but witnessed. The kind of thing that gets photographed and forwarded to other units. The message wasn't really about what Hannah had done. It was about what happened when you defied him. She kept working. 2 more medication checks. A patient in room 9 with elevated creatinine levels who needed fluids. A family asking questions about discharge paperwork. The hospital operated in its own time zone, one where a piece of paper on a bulletin board eventually became background static in the rhythm of bedpans and vital signs and the endless hum of machines designed to keep people alive. Then came lunch. Hannah sat down at the corner table in the break room at 1:15 p.m. with a sandwich she'd packed that morning, turkey and Swiss on whole wheat, the kind of fuel a body tolerates rather than enjoys. She opened her lunch container and set it down. At the same moment, 4 nurses, Jessica, Maria, Tom, and Derek, glanced up from their table. One of them looked at the bulletin board. Then back at Hannah. Then at each other. It was a silent conversation happening at the speed of recognition. The decision was made in microseconds. Jessica stood first. Then Maria. Tom gathered his bag. Derek followed, his chair scraping against the tile floor with a sound like a warning. They walked out without speaking. No words. No dramatic exit. Just four people standing and leaving, removing themselves from her presence like she'd become something contagious. The break room emptied. The refrigerator hummed its mechanical lament. Hannah sat alone under the fluorescent lights, which buzzed with the sound of electricity trying to approximate daylight. She looked at her sandwich. She wasn't hungry anymore. Hunger was something that happened to people who believed the future would require fuel. She set the container down and stared at it the way astronomers stare at distant stars, present but impossibly far away. But that wasn't the worst part. When Hannah returned to the floor for the evening shift, things had shifted. Not dramatically. Nothing you could point to and say, there. That's where it changed. It was subtler, the absence of things rather than the presence of them. When she walked past the nursing station, conversations didn't stop. They just deflated, like air leaving a balloon after someone lets go of the string. Nobody made eye contact. The unit clerk who usually asked about her son stopped asking. The respiratory therapist who normally joked about the coffee being strong enough to wake the dead just nodded when she passed. The silence had its own weight. At 2:19 a.m., Hannah was checking the Marine's vitals when she noticed something. A new name on the chart. Dr. Brennan had been assigned as attending physician. Brennan specialized in psychiatric holds. Involuntary commitment paperwork. The kind of physician you called when you'd already decided a patient was a problem that needed a legal solution rather than a medical one. Hannah's hands moved through the vital sign check on pure automation, blood pressure cuff, pulse oximeter, the familiar touchpoints of assessment. The Marine watched her work. He didn't look afraid. He looked like he was waiting for something. Sterling found her in the hallway at 3:15 a.m., his presence materializing before she saw him. He moved with the absolute confidence of someone accustomed to spaces rearranging themselves around him. Patient reassignment, Nurse Clarke. Effective immediately. His voice was calm now. That was somehow worse than the anger would have been. Anger was human. This was institutional. He needs continuity of care. Hannah's voice stayed level. Not a plea. An observation. What he needs is a competent treatment team. Sterling smiled without warmth, the kind of smile that predators show when they've already won the hunt. You're not it. Dr. Brennan will take it from here. Hannah didn't argue. She watched through the window as Dr. Brennan entered the exam room 40 minutes later, his clipboard heavy with forms that looked heavier than paper had any right to be. The Marine kept his eyes fixed on those worn combat boots sitting beside his bed, the ones that had walked through Sangin and forward bases and every place between here and there. The ones that held a story only certain people could read. Hannah stood at the glass, separated by the thickness of institutional distance, and waited for whatever happened next. The night shift folded around Hannah like a familiar weight. 11:15 p.m., and the fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical prayer above the corridor. She moved through her assigned rooms with the precision of someone who had held broken things together in places where the dark came early and stayed late. Room 4, Mrs. Chen's blood pressure, stable. Room 6, Mr. Alvarez's catheter output, documented. Room 9, the isolation protocol still in place, the quiet room where the Marine lay breathing, waiting. She wasn't assigned to him anymore. That memo had been clear, typed on hospital letterhead and posted where everyone could see it. But there were distances in a hospital that weren't measured in feet. There was the distance between what you were ordered to do and what you could live with. Hannah understood the difference. She had lived in that space for 8 months. The night stretched like taffy. 12:45 a.m., and the unit had that particular silence that meant most of the day staff had finally gone home. Hannah passed the break room and didn't look inside. The 4 nurses, Jessica, Marla, Diane, and Chen, had claimed it as their own now. The whispers stopped when Hannah approached the supply closet. The conversation shifted to text messages when she walked past the medication station. At 2 a.m., she overheard Jessica telling someone on the phone, "Yeah, that's the nurse. The one who went rogue. Refused direct orders." Sterling put it all in writing. Hannah restocked the crash cart. Surgical tape. Sterile gauze. 14-gauge angiocath needles in their sealed packages. Her hands moved with the steady rhythm of someone who had done this 10,000 times, in field hospitals under mortar fire, in emergency departments during mass casualty protocols, in places where hesitation meant someone's child didn't come home. The sound of supplies sliding into their slots was almost meditative. Click. Slide. Click. Slide. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part arrived at 7 a.m. when the day shift walked in. Dr. Sterling was already on the unit by then, unusual for an administrator, but Sterling made sure to be visible when he needed to be. He stood at the front desk with his phone pressed to his ear, his suit the color of money, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone who had learned that volume could substitute for conviction. Hannah was reviewing her chart notes, her back to the hallway, her shoulders positioned so that no part of her body crossed the invisible line Sterling had drawn. "I appreciate that, Tom," Sterling was saying. "Board meeting Thursday. I'll need your vote on the credentialing review." A pause. "Yeah, it's serious. We're looking at potential mental health concerns, patient safety issues. Could be career-ending stuff." Another pause, and then Sterling laughed, the kind of laugh that sounded like a lock clicking shut. "Thanks, buddy. I owe you one." The phone went down. The whisper campaign had already started, Hannah knew. Sterling wasn't the type to yell. He was too intelligent for that. He was the type to make calls to people who owed him favors. He was the type to weaponize institutions against a single nurse who had made the mistake of being competent when he needed her to be compliant. By 8 a.m., Sterling had called the board chair. By 9 a.m., he had contacted Mercy General's credentialing officer and requested a full review of Hannah's nursing license verification. By 9:30, he had made a call to St. Thomas University's nursing school, where Hannah had completed her civilian certification 18 months ago. The voice on the phone, a woman named Dr. Reeves in the Academic Affairs Office, listened to Sterling's concerns with the practiced attention of someone who worked in institutional risk management. "We're seeing some concerning patterns in her patient interactions," Sterling explained. "Dismissal of chain of command. Questionable judgment calls. Refusal to follow protocol. I'm wondering if there were any red flags during her studies that we should be revisiting." Dr. Reeves pulled Hannah's file. 3.9 GPA. Commendations from her clinical supervisors. A note from her preceptor, exceptional technical skills. Calm under pressure. Natural leader. But Dr. Reeves was trained to hear what wasn't being said. An administrator wouldn't call about a good employee unless something was genuinely wrong. And in academia, as in hospitals, liability was the only god that mattered. "I'll review her records again," Dr. Reeves said carefully. "And I'll be documenting this call. You understand we take these matters very seriously." "Of course," Sterling said. "I just want to make sure she got the support she needed." By 10:30 a.m., Sterling had commissioned an outside investigator. A woman named Patricia Voss from a firm called Institutional Compliance Solutions. Sterling briefed her in his office with the door closed, the files spread across his mahogany desk, the narrative already constructed: a nurse with military background, possible PTSD, acting erratically, insubordinate, making medical decisions outside her scope of practice, potentially a danger to patients. The investigator was very thorough. She would need to review video footage. Interview staff. Look at patient charts. Examine the Marine's care timeline. "How soon can you move?" Sterling asked. "By this afternoon," Voss said. "I'll need access to your security system." That was when things accelerated. By 11 a.m., the investigator was watching footage from the examination room where Sterling had humiliated Hannah in front of the Marine and his daughter. By 11:30, Voss had completed preliminary interviews with 4 day-shift nurses, all of whom suddenly recalled concerning incidents, moments where Hannah had been defensive, moments where she had seemed to act without authorization, moments that in the retelling had the hollow ring of stories rehearsed. Hannah was in the staff lounge checking the schedule for her next shift when nurse manager Patricia Huang appeared in the doorway. Her expression was the kind that came with paperwork and security. "Hannah, I need you to come with me." The walk to the HR office took 47 seconds. Hannah counted the steps automatically, a habit from years of pacing compound perimeters, of calculating distances and exit routes. The HR director, a man named Michael Chen, sat behind a desk with a manila folder positioned at a 90-degree angle. There was ceremony in that positioning. There was deliberation. "We've received some concerning information," Chen began, "and we need to place you on immediate administrative leave while we conduct a formal investigation." He slid a letter across the desk. Her hands didn't shake as she took it. "Your badge will be deactivated immediately. Security will escort you from the building. You're welcome to bring your personal items from your locker." Hannah read the words without reading them. Mental health concerns. Patient safety investigation. Insubordination. Unfit to practice. Pending investigation outcome. "May I ask what this investigation is regarding?" Her voice had that flat quality now, the one that came when systems were shutting down, when the body prepared itself for impact. Chen hesitated. "There are questions about your clinical decision-making and your mental health stability. Dr. Sterling has submitted documentation. Dr. Sterling is the hospital administrator. He's not my clinical supervisor. That's why we're investigating," Chen said carefully. "Please bring your belongings. Security is waiting in the hallway." The locker room smelled like stale coffee and the industrial-strength detergent they used on the linens. Hannah's locker was small, a space 8 inches wide, 24 inches tall. A cracked ceramic mug that her son had made her in 2nd grade, 12 years ago. A small succulent plant with brown edges, something she'd tried to keep alive because keeping things alive mattered, even small things. A photograph in a plastic frame of her son in dress blues, commissioned as a Navy officer, smiling at a camera, not knowing his mother was less than 2 years away from disappearing entirely. She placed them in the cardboard box that security had provided. The box was the kind used for shipping small packages. It sagged slightly when she loaded the weight of her life into it. The hallway felt longer than it had before. The fluorescent lights cast everything in that pale institutional glow. Through the glass partition at the nurse's station, she could see Jessica's face turn away. Marla whispered something to someone Hannah couldn't see. The day shift watched her walk past with the careful non-attention of people who had decided that looking directly at her was dangerous. The ER doors slid open automatically, which meant the building still recognized her as human for exactly 3 more seconds before she stepped outside and the world changed. The rain came down in sheets. Savannah rain, thick and warm and relentless, the kind that moved like a living thing. The cardboard box sagged immediately. The photograph of her son, the dress blues, the smile, the impossibility of him not knowing where she was, the corner of the frame darkened as water began its slow work of erosion. Hannah stood at the bus stop across the street, watching the rain collect in the box. Watched the mug absorb moisture. Watched the succulent remaining leaves begin to wilt. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. This was the part no one tells you about disgrace. It isn't dramatic. It's just the quiet realization that you've been removed from the equation, that you no longer matter to the machine, that 17 years of Navy service and 3 tours in Sangin and 2 Purple Hearts and a Navy Cross don't mean anything when they're hidden. She had a bank account with $4,236 in it. A 2-year-old Honda Civic that needed brake work. An apartment lease that was month to month. A son who didn't know she existed. The rain kept falling. The box kept falling apart. And then, at exactly 3:32 p.m., her phone rang. It was the hospital's main line. Hannah almost didn't answer. Almost let it go to voicemail. But something, muscle memory, maybe, or the habits of a senior chief petty officer who never ignored a direct communication, made her pick up. The voice on the other end was Carol, the daughter. Breathing hard. Frightened. "You need to come back. Now. Please. I don't know what's wrong with my father, but he's doing something with his hands, and the nurse on duty doesn't understand what he's trying to say, and he's grabbing at people, and nobody knows what to do, and they said you can't be here, they said it was against orders, but..." Carol's voice broke. "He's asking for you. He's asking for Stingray." The rain stopped mattering at that moment. The box stopped mattering. The job, the humiliation, the systematic dismantling of her credibility, all of it crystallized into a single point of clarity that moved like a lance through everything Sterling had built. He had made one critical mistake. He had assumed the Marine was just a patient. He had assumed the daughter was just a family member. He had assumed that Hannah Clarke was just a nurse. None of those assumptions were true. At 11:38 p.m., the monitor alarm cut through the quiet hallway like a scalpel. Hannah was halfway through her rounds when she heard it, not the usual rhythmic beeping, but the sharp, insistent shriek that meant something had changed. She moved toward room 7 without thinking, her body already knowing the answer before her mind could catch up. The Marine was breathing wrong. Rapid. Shallow. His lips had taken on a faint bluish tint, the kind of color Hannah had learned to read in Kandahar field hospitals where the overhead lights hummed and the air tasted like copper and diesel. His chest wall looked wrong too, one side rising and falling while the other barely moved at all. He clawed at his own chest, eyes wide, searching for help that wasn't coming. Tension pneumothorax. The diagnosis was immediate, certain, written in the physics of collapsed lung and pressurized air pushing against his heart. 10 seconds of observation and Hannah knew exactly what was killing him. She turned and ran toward the crash cart stationed at the nurse's station. Dr. Patel, the on-call resident, was charting at the desk, barely looking up when Hannah passed. She didn't ask permission. Permission was a luxury she no longer had. Sterling had made sure of that with his write-up, his careful orchestration, his way of turning a simple medical refusal into institutional gospel. Room 7. Code Blue. "I need backup," Hannah called, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent 3 tours calling in coordinates under fire. Patel's head snapped up. The Marine. He followed her down the hallway, moving faster now, but his steps were uncertain. Hesitant. When they reached the room, he froze at the threshold, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides as the Marine's oxygen saturation ticked downward on the monitor, 88, 86, 84. "Call for respiratory therapy." "Get me the crash cart," Hannah said. She was already at the bedside, her fingers finding the landmarks of his chest, the second intercostal space, the midclavicular line, the exact anatomical coordinates that had been burned into her muscle memory by 9 hours of standing over a bleeding field hospital while mortars landed outside and her own hands wouldn't stop shaking. Except now they weren't shaking. Now they were steady. "You can't," Sterling explicitly said, Patel stammered, his voice climbing into the register of panic. Hannah grabbed the 14-gauge needle from the crash cart without looking at him. The plastic wrapper crinkled between her fingers like the rustle of desert wind. "I need you to step back." Not a request. It wasn't the tone of a night shift nurse asking for space. It was the tone of someone who had given orders in rooms where disobedience meant people died. She swabbed the skin with antiseptic, the sharp chemical smell of it momentarily transporting her back to FOB Shank, to the smell of the same iodine solution, to hands that had learned to move with the terrible precision of someone who had already failed enough patients. Never again. Never another one. The needle went in at a 45-degree angle, perpendicular to the ribs. There was a moment of resistance, the kind of tactile feedback that told her she was in the right place, doing the right thing, and then the hiss of air escaping. Pent-up pressure releasing like a held breath finally exhaled. The sound was almost musical, the sound of a life coming back. The Marine's chest expanded. His oxygen saturation climbed. 85, 89, 93. The monitor's rhythm steadied. His hand stopped clawing. His eyes, wild moments before, found Hannah's and held them with the kind of recognition that transcends language. "He needs a chest tube," Hannah said quietly, straightening up. The needle had done its job, a temporary fix, a bridge to the definitive intervention. Respiratory therapy. Page surgery. Now. Patel stared at her as though she had suddenly turned into someone else. Maybe she had. The timid nurse who apologized for using the supply closet had vanished. In her place stood someone whose hands moved with the fluid certainty of someone who had already chosen 1,000 times to save a life instead of looking away. Carol appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "You saved him. Oh God, you saved him." Hannah didn't respond. She was already documenting the procedure, her handwriting precise and clinical, recording the time, the findings, the intervention. The official record. The evidence that would, in approximately 6 hours, become the reason for her termination. At 6:22 a.m., Security Officer Marcus Webb appeared at the nurse's station with a cardboard box. His expression was apologetic, which made it worse. "Ms. Clarke, you need to come with me." Not a request. That much was consistent. Sterling's office was cold, all polished mahogany and framed certifications from medical boards that had never questioned him. He sat behind his desk with the posture of someone who believed institutions existed to protect men like him. Judith Markoff, the HR director, stood beside him with a folder so thin it barely existed. 48 hours wasn't much time to build a legal case, but it was enough time to build the appearance of one. "You performed an invasive procedure on a patient you were explicitly barred from treating," Sterling said, sliding a termination letter across the desk like dealing cards. "That's grounds for immediate termination. Insubordination. Practicing medicine without a license. Reckless endangerment." Hannah's voice stayed quiet. Controlled. He was dying. "You're done here." Sterling didn't even look at her. He was already moving on, already certain of the outcome. That was his greatest weakness. He had become so accustomed to being obeyed that he could no longer recognize defiance when it stood directly in front of him wearing a name badge and scrubs still damp with rain. The walk to her locker felt longer than 8 months. Hannah packed methodically. A cracked mug with a faded anchor, one of the few things from before. A dying succulent she'd forgotten to water, its leaves papery and brittle. A photo of her son in dress blues, taken 2 years ago, before she disappeared without telling him where she was going or why. Security walked her through the main lobby at shift change. The ER staff stopped and stared. Some of them looked sympathetic. Most of them looked afraid. Fear was contagious, and Sterling had infected the entire institution with it. The rain hit Hannah like cold hands as she stepped into the parking lot. It hammered the cardboard box, soaking through the bottom, turning her personal history into pulp. She stood at the bus stop on Victory Drive, the only other person out in the downpour, and her hand started to shake. Not the professional shake of fatigue. The shake of PTSD, the involuntary tremor that came when the adrenaline wore off and her nervous system remembered that she had been violated, exposed, cast out. Her hand shook from holding it together for 8 months without speaking about Sangin, without explaining the nightmares, without telling anyone why she'd walked away from a career and a son and a life that had become too heavy to carry. The water soaked through the cardboard. Her mother's mug hit the pavement and cracked further. Her phone rang. She didn't answer. It rang again. The hospital calling, no doubt, checking on the Marine, asking about post-procedure protocol, pretending they hadn't just destroyed her. The phone rang a 3rd time. Hannah looked at the caller ID, Carol. She answered. "You need to come back," Carol said, her voice urgent, shaking. "Right now." He won't let anyone near him. He grabbed Nurse Kim's wrist and he's writing something. Hannah's breath caught. "Carol, I've been terminated." "I can't." He's tracing letters on her palm. Carol's voice rose. "He wrote Stingray." The word hit like a physical blow. Stingray. The call sign no one here was supposed to know. The designation from another life, another world, a rank and a history that was supposed to stay buried forever. Hannah closed her eyes and stood up from the bus stop, abandoning the cardboard box to the rain. The drive back to Mercy General took 8 minutes. Hannah was soaked through when she burst through the ER doors, water streaming from her hair, her scrubs clinging to her skin like a second life trying to pull her back in. Security tried to stop her at the desk. Carol appeared from nowhere and grabbed his arm. "That's the senior chief. You don't touch her." Room 7 was crowded. The Marine sat upright in bed, eyes locked on the doorway, waiting. Carol stepped forward with a manila folder, her hands visibly trembling as she opened it. "I looked you up," she whispered. "After you left, I needed to understand what he was trying to tell me." She looked down at the document. Senior Chief Petty Officer Hannah Clarke. United States Navy. 50 people had materialized in the doorway and the hallway beyond. Hannah could feel their stares, each one a weight on her shoulders. 3 combat tours embedded with Marine units, Carol read, her voice breaking. She turned the page. Navy Cross recipient. She paused. Bronze Star with Valor. 2 Purple Hearts. A voice cut through the silence from the back of the crowd, "Make a hole." The nurses parted like water before a blade. Lieutenant Commander James Rourke stood in a SEAL Team shirt, the kind of presence that made the air pressure change, his eyes locked on Hannah with the shock of recognition. "Stingray." He moved forward, his voice carrying to every corner of the hallway. "I served with Senior Chief Clarke in Sangin, 2012. She pulled 17 Marines out of a kill zone under sustained fire." The Marine tapped his worn combat boots twice. Once. Twice. A signal. A salute. The sound echoed through the room like gunshots. "She held a field hospital for 9 hours when our position was overrun," Rourke continued. 9 hours. Alone under fire. And she earned every single one of those decorations bleeding. Hannah stood in the center of the room, still dripping, water pooling on the tile floor, as the weight of her own history came crashing back down on her shoulders and everyone finally understood who they had been trying to bury. The phone call came 30 minutes after Hannah reached the bus stop, water soaking through cardboard while her hand steadied against the shaking that had nothing to do with cold. The hospital's main line connected to Carol's voice, breathless, urgent. He wrote something. The Marine. On a nurse's wrist. Letters traced in her palm like Morse code. Hannah's breath caught. What did it say? "Stingray." That's all. Just Stingray. "Hannah, what does that mean?" The world tilted. That call sign belonged to someone else now, someone buried under 8 months of night shifts and deliberate obscurity, someone who had walked away from every person who knew that name and never looked back. Hannah spoke quietly into the rain. "I'm coming back." The taxi ride took 12 minutes. Her uniform was still in her locker, still smelling of antiseptic and time. Security didn't stop her. Marcus Webb recognized the look in her eyes and simply stepped aside, nodding once, a gesture between warriors. She changed in the bathroom and moved through the corridors like a ghost returning to haunt the living. The mute Marine sat in bed 7, his daughter Carol beside him with a document folder trembling in her hands. His eyes found Hannah the moment she entered. He raised his right hand slowly, deliberately, and tapped his boots twice against the hospital bed frame. The sound carried like a military cadence. "Senior Chief," Carol whispered, voice breaking as she opened the folder. "My father kept this. He kept all of them. I found them in a storage unit 2 years ago." She began to read, each line a hammer strike against the silence. Senior Chief Petty Officer Hannah Clarke. Navy Cross recipient. Combat medic, 3 tours. Sangin Valley, Helmand Province, 2009 through 2011. The Marine's daughter paused, swallowing hard. Bronze Star with Valor. 2 Purple Hearts. 18 Marines documented as saved under her direct medical intervention in the Jolan district, Sangin Valley. Hannah stood perfectly still. She did not flinch. She did not break eye contact. Her hands, those hands that had held arterial pressure points under fire, that had threaded central lines in field hospitals where the walls rattled from incoming, remained steady at her sides. The doors opened like an answer to a prayer no one had spoken aloud. The man who entered carried himself with the particular grace of someone who had survived things the world preferred to forget. Lieutenant Commander James Rourke, SEAL Team 3, Bravo Platoon, wore civilian clothes but moved in the tactical awareness pattern of a man still counting exits and threat angles. His eyes found Hannah and something in his expression shifted like a door slamming open. Stingray. He said the name like a benediction. I served with you in Sangin. 2010, you pulled 17 Marines out of a kill zone north of the Helmand River. Held a field hospital for 9 hours under direct fire while the artillery walked rounds down the compound walls. His voice dropped, rougher now. Bronze Star with Valor. 2 Purple Hearts. And every single one of those decorations was earned bleeding. The room had gone silent in the way that only happened when truth arrived unannounced and impossible to deny. The Marine nodded again, tapping his boots twice more, his eyes locked on Hannah's face as if confirming something he had searched for across years and continents and the vast geography of loss. In the IT department on the 3rd floor, Ryan Chen, former Marine Corps Signals Intelligence Specialist turned Systems Administrator, watched the security monitoring logs with the patient attention of someone trained to see patterns in noise. Dr. Sterling's login attempts lit up the screen in real time. Desperate. Panicked. Searching for files from the past 48 hours, the patient room confrontation, the hallway blockade, the moment when he had tried to bury a decorated senior officer under the weight of his own arrogance. Ryan had already copied everything. Needle decompression footage. The public humiliation in room 7. The break room scene where 4 nurses stood and walked out in silence. The evidence of blocked emergency care. He moved with the efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that speed and silence were survival tools. 3 email addresses. State Medical Board. FBI Healthcare Fraud Division. His personal encrypted server. Then a single message to Sterling's inbox, looking for something. Ryan watched the failed login attempts continue for another 17 seconds before stopping entirely. The phone in Sterling's office rang almost immediately, 2 board members sending his calls directly to voicemail. Within 90 minutes, federal agents arrived with a warrant and a list of questions about phantom consultations, equipment kickbacks, billing practices that had netted Sterling approximately $847,000 over 18 months. The exact kind of scrutiny he had engineered Hannah's removal to avoid. The very thing her presence in his department had threatened to expose. At 4:15 p.m., Dr. Sterling was escorted from Mercy General by 3 FBI agents while the nursing staff watched from windows and doorways. No one looked away. The same nurses who had stood and left the break room observed in silence as he passed, his briefcase in hand, his network evaporating like smoke in sunlight. His medical license would be permanently revoked within weeks. The state investigation would expand. Insurance fraud charges would follow. The board members who owed him favors suddenly had no memory of his name. The equipment suppliers who had paid him commissions quietly deleted records and consulted their own legal teams. Sterling's fall was not dramatic, it was bureaucratic, methodical, inevitable. The system grinding the way it did when enough people finally decided to apply pressure. Hannah learned about it from a news alert on her phone while sitting in her car in the hospital parking lot, rain drumming the roof like distant artillery fire. 6 months later, the bronze nameplate on the office door read Director of Veteran Services, Mercy General. Hannah sat at a desk made of real wood instead of metal, her office windows overlooking Savannah's historic district. On a shelf beside stacks of patient files, the worn combat boots rested on polished oak. Beside them, a photograph, Daniel Clarke in civilian clothes, smiling for the first time in 3 years, his arm around his mother's shoulders, both of them standing in front of the hospital. He had flown to Savannah the day the news broke and never left. Now he worked as a veterans outreach coordinator in her department, making phone calls to military service members who had been turned away from other facilities, who carried invisible wounds that most hospitals didn't know how to treat. The mute Marine, Gunnery Sergeant Robert Chen, recovered fully from his pneumothorax and now volunteered twice weekly, teaching communication techniques to other TBI patients who had lost their voices to war. Carol brought coffee every Tuesday, the same way Hannah's son brought her reports of new cases that needed her particular expertise. The hospital had recovered $2.3 million in fraudulent billings recovered from Sterling schemes. Ryan Chen received a commendation and a promotion to Chief IT Security Officer. The facility began developing new protocols for veteran-centered care, protocols that other hospitals started calling about, wanting to learn from. Hannah's Navy Cross hung in a shadow box on her office wall, beside a handwritten note from 17 Marines, dated 2011, written before they understood what their survival would cost her. The door opened without a knock. Daniel entered with a patient file, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to recognize when his mother needed to see something that mattered. New admission. Navy Corpsman. PTSD diagnosis. Been turned away from 3 facilities in the Charleston area. They said communication barriers made him non-compliant. Hannah took the file without comment. She opened it and read the patient's name, Marcus Webb, no relation to the security officer, a 19-year veteran with 2 Purple Hearts and a notation that he hadn't spoken to another human being in 4 years except in single-word fragments. She stood, moved to the window, looked down at the parking lot where she had stood in the rain 8 months ago with all her possessions in a sagging cardboard box. That woman felt like someone from another lifetime. "Send him in," Hannah said, her voice steady and certain as a command echoing across a field hospital under fire. "Tell him Senior Chief Clarke is ready when he is." Daniel nodded and turned to leave. "Mom." He paused at the threshold. "Thank you for coming back." Hannah didn't respond, but her hands moved to touch the photograph on her desk, the one of her son smiling. That was answer enough. The question people started asking, the one that spread from veteran services forums to military family networks to hospital administrators across the country, was simple: how did other facilities miss her? How did 10 different doctors look at a patient in need and walk away? The answer came in the form of new protocols, new training, new conversations about what it meant to see someone clearly. Hannah began consulting with former military healthcare leaders, establishing frameworks for identifying patients with communication barriers who had been mislabeled as non-compliant. The work expanded beyond Mercy General. Other hospitals requested her expertise. Healthcare systems in Atlanta, Jacksonville, and Charleston implemented her protocols. The Veteran Services Department that Hannah built became a model that other institutions started calling about, wanting to know how to transform the way they treated invisible wounds. The boots stayed on the shelf. The Navy Cross stayed on the wall. The photograph of her son stayed on her desk. And Hannah Clarke, Senior Chief Petty Officer Hannah Clarke, sat in her office with the door open, waiting for the next Marine who needed to be reminded that someone was finally listening. If you or someone you know has been misdiagnosed, dismissed, or turned away from healthcare, share this story. And if you've served, if you understand what it means to carry something no one can see, subscribe for more stories about the people who refuse to give up on you. Comment below, what would you have done? Would you have stayed? Would you have come back?